Welcome back. All right, so as the offseason rolls along, now I've talked about breakthrough candidates. These are young players that, hey, might be, ready to have a big season and take that next step offensively. Now, these are players that I'm going to talk about who I think just had down years and could bounce back and have a better year in 2024, 2025. Now, not all of them are going to. In some cases, they're older players. And so the production drops off. But we've seen older players that when that production drop happens, they get a little bit of a boost. Does it last past one season? Who knows? But at any rate, I've got 32 teams on the board. We start with Detroit, we end with Columbus. It's a randomized order. I didn't have any reason for putting them in the order that I did. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with Detroit. And I'm wearing Detroit because it feels like they've been outside the playoffs for a long time. So they've got to get back in, right? So Detroit's entry is Andrew Copp. Now, I've talked about Copp for years. He was one of my favorite players in Winnipeg. It's been more of a challenge scoring in Detroit, it seems. 79 games, 13 goals, 20 assists, 33 points. He's better than 13 goals. He should be scoring more than 13 goals. I would say a minimum of 40 points, a minimum of 18, 19 goals. It's where he should be. Sure, I'll say 20. Why not? But yeah, Copp, I think, is better than this. Now, whether or not he ends up bouncing back this year, we'll see. But it just feels like his numbers are a little bit lower than what they should be. Not a lot, but enough that people don't really like his contract. Carolina. Carolina was an easy one. I looked at the team stats, and I'm like, it has to be Kotkaniemi. And every year, Habs fans have to be glad that Montreal didn't match that contract. And yet, if they had, maybe Kotkaniemi would have developed better in Montreal than he has in Carolina. 79 games, 12 goals, 15 assists, 27 points. Kotkaniemi has to be better than that. You could double those point totals and still look at his contract and say, I guess that's okay. But yeah, with those numbers, that contract looks absolutely awful. So Jesperi Kotkaniemi, I'm hoping he has a nice bounce back season. I'm hoping for at least 20 goals from him, and I'm sure Carolina management's in that same position. It has been a rough past couple of years for Kotkaniemi. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Philadelphia. Philadelphia was pretty easy too. Some of these teams were not easy, but to me, Philadelphia was relatively simple. Sean Couturier had a nightmare season. He was a healthy scratch at points. And then said he didn't understand why he was a healthy scratch. 74 games, 11 goals, 27 assists, 38 points for Philly. He should be in the 20-goal range, should be in the 50-point range. Maybe because it was his first full season after having some injury problems before that. Maybe it was just tough for him. And maybe this year we see those offensive numbers come up a little bit. Now, again, he may end up being one of those players that mid-season we find out, they may end up moving him. That could happen, right? It's Philadelphia. Since they're in the midst of a rebuild, there's always the possibility that veteran like Couturier, if he has a bounce back, could become suddenly a popular trade target for other teams. So we'll see. Washington, I reached a bit on Washington. I'm going to be honest, because I've been asked about Tom Wilson at times. And my honest opinion has been that power forwards that play the style of hockey Wilson does, the offense drops off as they get into their early 30s. So 74 games, 18 goals, 17 assists, 35 points. But the Capitals in general had an anemic offense this past season. That should get better. That should help to drag up some of Wilson's point totals too. He has to stay healthy. He has to avoid suspensions, of course, with the physical play that he provides for them. There's always going to be those times that he's right on the line, and you got to make sure you're not crossing said line. But Wilson, I think he can get back above 20 goals. I think he can get back up above 40 points. We shall see. For Edmonton, Edmonton was not easy because most of the players in Edmonton had pretty good seasons. But Connor Brown had a really, really rough regular season. Exact same numbers as Janmark, but I'm choosing Brown over Janmark because Brown with the 4 goals and 8 assists in 71 games, that's not enough. He was so snake bit during the regular season, and then in the playoffs, he actually had a pretty good run there. So, is he going to be able to at least get to 10 goals this year? I certainly hope so. Connor Brown, the work ethic is there, just the production wasn't, so we'll see if Brown can have that bounce back for them this coming season. But he should, right? For Nashville was difficult. Very difficult to find somebody who I felt like had a down season. So I'm going with Cody Glass. Yeah, I know. Take it as a compliment, Nashville. Cody Glass is the closest I could come to finding somebody that I felt like, you know what, could have a bounce back year. He only played 41 games. 6 goals, 7 assists, 13 points. Cody Glass was a first-round draft pick that has never reached the heights expected of him when he was drafted 6th overall. But I still think he can be a decent bottom 6 forward, and I think 13 points in 41 games. The point per game rate's just too low, and so I'm going with Cody Glass there. For St. Louis wasn't that easy either, to be honest. But I'm going with Kasperi Kapanen, who did have a rough season. 73 games, 6 goals, 16 assists, 22 points. He shouldn't have 6 goals. He needs to be at least double digits in goals. I would say doubling that goal total would be nice. Doubling the goal and point total would be nice. And St. Louis fans will likely agree with me. Kapanen had his opportunities, just they weren't going in for him. This year they should start going in. The law of averages says they should. We'll see, though. Sometimes the law of averages doesn't work when it comes to hockey player careers. For Anaheim, I'm going with Troy Terry. I know Troy Terry can produce better than he did this past season. 76 games, 20 goals, 34 assists, 54 points for Terry. Now, Terry should benefit from an Anaheim team that their attack will get better. Point totals should go up across the board. Terry should benefit from that. I'd be kind of surprised if that doesn't happen, but Anaheim surprised me by getting worse this past season than what we were all expecting. We expected them to incrementally get better, and it just didn't happen. But Troy Terry should have a really strong season. I know he's capable of 70-plus points, so we'll see what happens there. Vancouver, you know what? I'm going with this one for Vancouver because people always bring up Pettersson. And what's interesting with Pettersson is he plays 82 games, has 34 goals, 55 assists, and 89 points. But if you listen to some of the fans about it, Pettersson had a miserable season. The guy sucks. He's not worth $50. They need to trade him out. He's absolutely horrible. Why is he still here? I disagree. I think Pettersson can get back above 100 points. I think he can. And regardless of why he had an off year, he had an off year. It happens with players. And so I've got Pettersson on the board for 2 reasons. One, I think he does get back above 100 points. And 2, I feel like with the Canucks, there are very few players you can look at and say, well, clearly they had a bad season, so they're going to have a bounce back. I looked. It was like, no, Joshua had a breakthrough year. Höglander was good. Garland was good. Besser had 40 goals. Miller was fantastic. Finding a candidate on the Canucks, not easy. Hughes breaking records. So I went with Pettersson. Seattle, this is going to rely on health. Burakovsky. Burakovsky played 49 games this past season. 7 goals, 9 assists, 16 points. Yeah, he's better than that. Burakovsky, 7 goals in 49 games is a jaw dropper. Burakovsky's a very talented forward who I think just had a really just statistically poor season, and I would think he's due for a bounce back. So, again, when you're in your fantasy leagues and if you're, drafting 30, 40 different guys or whatever, you get those deep drafts, and some leagues work that way. Burakovsky could be a good late round pickup. Buffalo. So coming out of last season, I'm going to go ahead and say I could have had Tage Thompson as a guy who maybe scored a bit too much. I know I didn't, though. The player that I put that scored too much was Alex Tuch, and Tuch's numbers did come down. This year, though, Tage Thompson, his line mate, is the player that I'm saying should have a bounce back. 71 games, 29 goals, 27 assists, 56 points. Respectable totals for most players, but for Buffalo to really, truly get above that playoff line and maybe stay there, they need Thompson to get back to that 40-goal range and maybe push towards 50. At one point in the 2022-2023 season, it definitely looked like he was going to be a 50-goal scorer, and he just didn't quite get there. So we'll see with Thompson what happens, but I'm going with Thompson. Also throw out there that, because Thompson reminds me of Logan Thompson and all that, I don't have a goaltender in this. I thought about whether or not to include goalies, and I opted to leave goalies off this list. I may talk about goalies at a later date. Minnesota. So this is where it's kind of interesting, because when I'm looking at numbers from this past season, Frederick Gaudreau stands out because it feels like 5 goals and 10 assists for 15 points in 67 games. That's appalling, comparatively speaking, to the previous 2 seasons. Now, if he'd had 1 good year, all right, maybe it was just that 1 good year, but he had 2 good years, and I think he can get into that bounce-back category as well. He should be at least double digits in goals. Gaudreau's a good player. I'm not saying he's fantastic, but doubling those totals, I think, is completely reasonable. 30 points in 82 games. He can do that. So that would be a big bounce back right there. Boston, player I've talked about a number of times already over the summer. It has to be Elias Lindholm. Lindholm played 75 games this past season, 15 goals, 29 assists, 44 points. And if you're a Bruins fan, and also I'd throw in for Bruins management, they are hoping for a bounce back from Lindholm. 15 goals, if he gets that this season with them paying him so much money, if you are of the mind that Don Sweeney's done a terrible job as the general manager of Boston and you'd like to see him gone, Lindholm equaling those totals and staying in that 45-point range, that could do it. That absolutely, yes, that could do it. Lindholm, it is it's an interesting risk that Boston's taken with Lindholm, because while he had a good playoff for Vancouver, those 44 points, personally, if I was a GM, hearing a $7.75 million ask, I would have said no. Again, I understand the money's there to spend, and Boston wanted to upgrade their center spot. They've wanted Lindholm for a long time. There's tremendous risk, but he's getting paid. He's going to get put into a spot where he can succeed. We shall see. For LA, this one should be relatively obvious. Kaliev had a miserable year. Now, there's been talk about, well, will LA bring him back and maybe Kaliev goes somewhere else? I don't know about that, but I know 7 goals and 8 assists, 15 points in 51 games. Kaliev's a better player than that. He has a good shot. I swear he does. We saw that very early when he first had the first call-up in his NHL career, and this past season it was just a nightmare. So, fresh, clean slate this year for LA, hoping that he can have that bounce-back season. For New Jersey, this is one, too, that it might just be that he's getting older. He's got a lot of mileage, but I'm going with Palat. 71 games, 11 goals, 20 assists, 31 points. The 11 goals, to me, seems low. So I'm going with Palat on this one, 31 points. I think he can hit 40 points. I think he can hit at least 17, 18 goals. But again, we'll see, right? Because as players get older, some of them don't bounce back. And in some cases, when I'm looking at teams, I'm like, I guess that's the guy. And that's kind of where I was with Palat. For the New York Rangers, so I didn't add Kakko for the breakthrough candidate because I've done that before, and it's frustrating because Kakko's got talent. But 61 games this past season, 13 goals, 6 assists, 19 points. That's an even lower scoring rate than he had before that. So I'm going to put Kakko on the board as a guy that I think can have a bounce-back season, at least score a point every other game, at least get into that range. It's going to depend on which line he's on and what opportunities he gets, sure. But Kakko should be in the 20-goal range, should be in the 40-point range. We shall see. But, yeah, Kakko has to get on a board during the summer when I do a 32-team video. I have a feeling that this is the 3rd year in a row that I've talked about Kakko in some capacity and about how his numbers should start getting better. So, here we are again. San Jose. So, this is injury-related. Logan Couture. He only got into 6 games this past season and only recorded 1 assist. I don't think he was 100% in the 6 games that he played. If San Jose is going to get better this year, one way that will really help is not just having, young guys get into the lineup and some of these kids they've drafted, but getting a healthy Logan Couture, getting Couture into at least 65, 70 games. And for Logan to be able to go out there and produce at about a 20-goal rate, 45-point rate. I'm not expecting Logan Couture to get back to what he was 5-10 years ago, but I do think Couture should be much better than 1 point in 6 games. I think as long as he can get healthy, fingers crossed on that one, we shall see. Tampa Bay. So I did double check, and by Connor Sherry's standards, this past season was nothing short of a nightmare. 57 games, 4 goals, 11 assists, 15 points. And again, Sherry's not a star player. He's not going to make you forget about all the other star players in Tampa for sure, but he should be better than 4 goals. And with the turnover they've had in the roster, maybe Sherry gets tried a little bit further up. Maybe they experiment with the lines a bit. Maybe Sherry's numbers come up. But it just feels like 15 points in 57 games is really low by Sherry's standards. For Utah, of course, I had to look up Arizona players. And it has to be Barrett Hayton. Hayden this past season, 33 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points. Barrett Hayton has shown at points during his career he's ready to be a top 6 forward. He has also shown that he has trouble staying healthy this past season, and his totals took an absolute nosedive over it. So, what's going to happen with Hayden this season? Well, the move to Utah should rejuvenate their players and could very well rejuvenate Hayden as well. So we'll see. We'll see how that all turns out. But I think Hayden can be good. We've seen him as the centerpiece of a pretty good top line in 2022-2023 with Schmaltz on one side and Keller on the other. So I would say run that during preseason and see what you can get going. Calgary. With Calgary, I'm pretty sure last summer this would have been my pick for them as well. So I apologize if this is going to become an annual thing. But Huberdeau's numbers have just been really low. 81 games, 12 goals, 40 assists, 52 points. This is a guy, as last year in Florida, there was discussion of, hey, maybe he should be in the Hart conversation. And that player has not gone to Calgary. This is not the same Jonathan Huberdeau. So 52 points in 81 games is nowhere near where he should be. Huberdeau has to be in the point per game range. Has to be. We'll see if that takes place. Vegas. For Vegas, I'm going with a player that's been rumored to be potentially on his way out of town. I think if it was going to happen, it already would have. And that's Pietrangelo. 64 games, 4 goals, 29 assists, 33 points. And his overall play was definitely down from previous seasons. I think Pietrangelo, while, yes, he's a little bit older than some of the other players on the board here, I think he can have a bounce-back season. Vegas may rely on him a little bit more with the turnover we've seen in the offseason. That may help him as well. And having Hanifin there has to help too. Like, I think keeping Hanifin around should help guys like Pietrangelo. But we'll see. So I think Pietrangelo should be able to get back into like the 45-point range. Again, I'm not saying like these are crazy. These guys are all going to double their totals. But 45 points in 80 games, I think he can get there, which would mean 12 more points in 16 more games. So not crazy, but possible. Winnipeg. You know, it's funny. I did a video on the Jets the other day, and I didn't mention Alex Iafallo. I didn't mention him at all. Oh, look at that. I had 10 assists. I added 10 points for last season's totals. I guess I'm really optimistic with Iafallo. But 11 goals, 16 assists, 27 points in 82 games. He is capable of more than that. We know he is capable of more than that. We've seen that when he was in LA. So the Winnipeg Jets may very well get some more goals and points out of Iafallo this year with his second year in Winnipeg. Again, it's a wait-and-see kind of thing, as all of these are, because nobody's playing until October, at least not in the regular season. We get the preseason started in September, and then people get all excited because hockey's coming back. But at this point in time, we're just discussing Iafallo. 11 goals to me seems low. I think he can hit at least 16 to 20 goals, so yeah, there you go. Chicago. Chicago was easy. Easy pick. Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall is never going to be back to being that above a point per game player that he was for a while during his career, but he's capable of more than 2 goals, 2 assists in 10 games. 4 points in 10 games is too low. I think that as long as he's healthy come training camp and for the season, I think Hall can still hit 55 points. And I'm guaranteeing there are people who've forgotten Taylor Hall's in Chicago and that his contract is still a thing. He still has that contract. So he was not a free agent this summer. He is still Chicago property, and we'll see which line he ends up on. But he was brought there to help out Bedard. If he's on a line with Bedard, let's say it's Hall on one side and Bertuzzi on the other, that might be an okay first line for a rebuilding team. Dallas. So this one was tough because Dallas had a pretty strong season offensively, but Roope Hintz, he did have some scoring droughts. So he ends up with 30 goals, 35 assists for 65 points in 80 games. This is where I will point out that for my breakthrough candidate, I went with Wyatt Johnston. It is difficult to find players in Dallas who don't look pretty good regularly, but Hintz is capable of a point per game. That 65 points is a drop from the year before. I think he gets back up to where he was previously. So not a huge jump, but I think for Hintz, as long as he can avoid those droughts, he should be pretty good. Montreal. Montreal, another team that I looked at and I was like, well, I guess I'll go with Josh Anderson because there weren't a lot of players in Montreal that I thought had down years. But 78 games, 9 goals, 11 assists, 20 points. Josh Anderson should at least be doubling those goal totals. I don't think he'll double them, but I think he should be better than 9 goals and 20 points. Should be. Again, there will be players on this board who may not get better in their point totals and may end up out of the league soon, because that's kind of how the NHL works. It's a very what have you done for me lately. I'm always kind of surprised at how a player will look really good one year and then the next year, yeah, they have a rough year and they're gone. They're out. It's like, wow. All right. I mean, they could bounce back, but sure, pitch them. Pittsburgh. Raquel. Rickard Rakell is capable of 30 goals. We know this. He played 70 games, had 15 goals, 22 assists, 37 points. One thing I was thinking about doing for this list, and I opted not to do it, was look at expected goals. It feels like Rakell should have had more goals. It just feels like Rakell should have had more goals for Pittsburgh. And again, if this team's going to jump back into the playoff picture and stay above the playoff line, Rakell getting his goal scoring back would go a long way for that. So Rakell's my pick for Pittsburgh. For Toronto, I looked at goals. Just going to say I looked at goals. Max Domi, not enough goals from him this past season. 9 goals, 38 assists, 47 points. Domi has to be in double digits. I'll go further to say Domi should be around 20 goals in a season. And so, yeah, Domi's my pick for Toronto. I think it's great that he's stuck around. I understand him sticking around. I also understand Bertuzzi moving on and why they didn't give him what he got from Chicago. But yeah, I think Domi's capable of scoring definitely more than 9 goals. So you guys can let me know your thoughts. But 9 goals to me seems very, very low. So yeah, that's where I'm at on that one. For Colorado, Colorado was tough because there are very few players I could argue need a bounce back. I will say honorable mention to Nichushkin. Once his suspension's over, he needs to keep his nose clean. And he needs to play the full season after that and then play in the playoffs. And remind Colorado fans why they thought he was fantastic before all the drama. But Gerard, 59 games, 3 goals, 15 assists, 18 points for Gerard. His numbers aren't bad for a defenseman, but by his standards, that's a little bit lower in his points per game. And I think Gerard jumps back up. And again, it's going to depend on being healthy, right? Some of these players dealing with injuries during the year, that's going to cause problems. But yeah, Gerard for me, I think 18 points, a little bit low. Florida. Florida did not have much for me to look at. When it comes to players who might have had a down year, yeah. So I'm going with Luostarinen, whose numbers did drop. They absolutely did drop. He played 82 games, so he played all 82, 12 goals, 15 assists, 27 points. And Luostarinen's numbers can be better than that. That's as far as I'm going with it. I don't think he's going to have a huge jump or anything, but Luostarinen should be better than 27 points. 27 points feels really low for Luostarinen. And again, it's a work ethic thing too. If the points match the work ethic, he should be up around 40 points. For Ottawa, I'm going with Josh Norris. Norris only played 50 games this season, 16 goals, 14 assists, 30 points. So with Norris, much like a guy like Rakell, we know he can score goals. We know that 16 goals in 50 games is respectable, but this is something. I think he can improve on that a lot. I do think that 16 goals in 50 games is low, and I think that that he can improve on that quite a bit. So we'll see if he does or if he doesn't, of course. But that's where I'm at on him. For the Islanders, I talked a lot about Anders Lee during the season, and this is where the expected goals comes in. He, according to Money Puck, was one of those players that should have had a lot more goals. Now, 81 games, 20 goals, 17 assists, 37 points. The goals are fine. I think he could bring his goals up to 23 or 24. The 37 points, it feels like, is really low. Low for what they're paying him and low compared to his normal career stats. So 37 points for Lee. I would think he should be in around the 55, 60 point mark. That should be a more reasonable number for him this coming season. We'll see if it happens. So we close things out with Columbus. I don't even look. I need to learn how to talk. I'm not even going to look at the paper for this one. Because again, same player I would have picked last year. But eventually, we got to get this right? Eventually. Reminds me of that whole, you go to Titanic 5 or 6 times to watch it in the movie theater, and you're like, eventually it's going to pass. Why aren't they learning? Why aren't they learning to stay away from the iceberg? Maybe Johnny Gaudreau is my Titanic here, where I'm expecting a different outcome. But adding Monahan should help. 81 games, 12 goals, 48 assists, 60 points. He does have stretches here and there where Johnny Gaudreau's productive, but nowhere near often enough, nowhere near lethal enough to justify the cap hit that Columbus is paying out for him. So Johnny Gaudreau is one that should bounce back, and ideally, when you've got him back with Monahan, you hope he gets back into point per game range. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. And again, it's all optimism. I do my best when I'm doing list videos to make sure they're optimistic, they're positive. Feels like there's so much negativity on the internet, no matter where you look. I try to make sure I'm positive. So that's my positive view on these are the players I think should have bounce back seasons. But let me know your picks. I don't think there's a wrong pick. I'm sure there's people pointing out picks going, but that one's definitely wrong. But hey, it's a fun list. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.